Hey, it's Noam and Ruben here with Reverb at Rax Tracks Recording Studios. We're here with another episode of What's That Sound? Today we're looking at the Iggy Pop track, Lust for Life. Let's check out the drums. So the drummer on this track was Hunt Sales, the engineer was Colin Thurston. It is a crazy sounding drum track for the time. It's much more aggressive than most drums were in the 70s, and it kind of has this bombastic energy that you just were not seeing in a lot of tracks at the time. Today, Jessica's gone. She's not gonna be in this video. Good drummers go on tour sometimes, and she's a good drummer, and so she's on tour. So we have another good drummer, Ruben. He's gonna talk about it instead of her. Don't worry about it.
So to create this drum sound today, we used a 14x5 70s Ludwig Acrolite. We used a 20-inch Gretsch new classic bass drum, and we used a pair of Istanbul Agop 15-inch hi-hats and a 20-inch crash cymbal, also traditional. For the bass drum, in particular, in order to achieve the pitch bend that we were hearing on the record, we had the batter side tuned pretty high, and we had the resonant side tuned pretty low, with nothing inside the kick.
So on paper, this drum sound seems like it's pretty simple, right? It's like a big roomy drum sound, a big open kick drum, big open snare. And it all feels pretty natural. There's not a ton of compression, a ton of like crazy stuff. But in order to achieve that and sound really, really natural while feeling as impactful as they want it to feel, we had to kind of pull some tricks out. So let's take a look at the individual mics and see how we did it. So kick drum, we used 2 microphones. Now, kick drum, we used a closed head. That was necessary, right? We had to use a closed head because when you put a hole in your kick drum head, it lets all the air escape and it makes the kick drum a lot shorter, right? If you close off the head, all the air kind of stays inside and it bounces back and forth, so it elongates the kick drum really significantly. That creates some challenges for us, right? Because normally when you record a kick drum, you might do like a kick out mic and a kick in mic, right? The kick in mic would give you all the attack, the kick out mic would give you the body. With this, obviously, we can't get inside the kick drum. So in order to get that attack, we had to come from the other side of the kick drum and record the batter side, right? So the point where the kick drum pedal makes contact with the kick drum head, we stuck a mic right there. It was a 414, and that was our batter mic that got all of our attack. Then on the other side, we wanted to capture the body of the drum, and for that we used a D12 as our kick out microphone. All right, let's check out the batter side. It actually sounds like a great drum sound on its own. It actually has a decent amount of low end, which is interesting because it's literally not even facing the drum itself. It's just facing straight down at the point of attack. The trouble with it is that it has a ton of bottom snare in it, which makes sense because the bottom snare is literally like inches away from where we stuck that mic. So we pulled a bit of a trick to deal with that. We put a multi-band compressor on this microphone, and on the snare drum, we sent a bus that went into the external input of the multi-band compressor. So we're kind of doing like a sidechain effect, right? The way that you would like sidechain a bass to the kick drum or something like that. We're doing that, except we're sidechaining the kick drum mic from the snare drum. Now what happens is every single time the snare drum hits, it's gonna pull down all of the high end of the kick drum, and it's gonna make it a much darker sound. So it means that when the snare drum is hitting, the kick drum is not gonna contribute a bunch of bottom snare to it. And when they hit together, the kick drum is maybe gonna lose a little bit of high end in its overall sound, but that's gonna get made up for by the fact that there's a snare drum happening on top of it. All right, let's take a look at the D12. D12 sounds horrible on its own. It sounds crazy, right? But there's like a certain growl to this kick drum that is a result of the fact that we have the the front head really, really loose and the batter side really, really tight. This accentuates that hugely, right? So like it's kind of like our growl fader, and as much growl as we need in that kick drum, we can add it with that microphone. I'm adding a little bit of like high mids on both of these kick drum mics, and what I'm doing a lot of is I'm filtering the low end, because we're not doing a 1990s drum sound or 2000s drum sound. We are doing a 70s rock drum sound, and the amount of low end that you need for that is not what you would need now. So we are reducing some of the low end with some shelving. Let's take a look at the snare. Snare drum sounds great. We're using a little bit of EQ to add a little bit of high end. We're using no compression on it because this track doesn't really need a lot of compression on the direct mics. The snare drum, originally we had put up a bottom snare mic, and we actually got rid of it because the snare sound just simply did not need it. It has plenty of high end on its own. Tons of the sound is going to come from the room mics anyways, so we don't need to deal with bottom snares at all. Let's move on to the overheads. So for the overheads, we used a pair of C12s, right? These are recreations that were made by Bill Bradley for us. They sound incredible, and like alone, they could be the entire drum sound. If we just had these mics, we'd be totally set. Listening to the record, we could tell that this was a stereo recording, right? But it did not have like this super modern stereo with like records in the 80s and 90s might have had, right? This is 70s recording, and for this recording, they wanted it to feel a little bit more like closed in, right? More in front of you rather than like you sitting at the drum kit. So to achieve that, we did do stereo mics, but we stuck them much closer together than you would typically use for like a modern overhead setup. So normally you might stick your mics 6 feet apart or even wider. For these, we had these mics about a foot apart, maybe a foot and a half apart. The result is that it is stereo, but it still feels very much in front of you. The hi-hat is kind of over here rather than like way over on the left side. Let's take a look at the room mics. This is the whole drum sound right here, right? The room mics are what is giving our kick drum its growl. They are what is giving our snare drum its length and its depth, and it's also what is making the cymbals sound much more aggressive than they normally would sound. This room mic, I knew that it needed a little bit of compression, right? Less than you think, right? It sounds like so bombastic, and you're like, oh, we gotta compress this like crazy. It doesn't need that much, but I am just licking it with a TG1 set to limit, and that's with the fastest release possible, right? So it's just cutting off it's just clamping down on all the transients, and then it's releasing as quickly as possible. But it's adding a bunch of energy to these mics. For the room mics, we used a pair of AEA 840s, and we had those set to an XY pattern, right? Again, not super, super wide like you might do with modern room mics. This captured a drum set in front of us, and for the kick drum in particular, that was really important because we knew that these room mics were gonna be like 50% of the kick drum sound. For the EQ on the room mics, we were filtering out a decent amount of lows. These room mics sounded incredible, and if we had just let them go un-EQ'd, they would have extended really, really low and given us a ton of like super sub information. We wanted to be wary of that because on the record, it sounds like there is a decent amount of control in the sub frequencies, right? And so the way that we did that was we let the sub stuff come from the kick drum mics, and for the room mics, we filtered everything above, let's say like 70 or 80 hertz, so that we still got a lot of kick drum character, but we didn't get the like super sub stuff from the rooms. Let's take a listen to all the drum mics together, and let's listen to some copyright-free music we composed underneath it. That's how we got the bombastic sound of Iggy Pop's Lust for Life.
So let us know in the comments below what kind of drum sound you guys want to hear next, and we'll see you next time.